thing about fear is, though, is it always elicits a response, okay? You ever go to an amusement park and people ride the scary rides for a reason? They want to strike of that fear. And what do when they ride the rides? Scream. Ah, you know. It elicits a response. Most frequently, it's a response of some kind of explosion or expression, or a response of seizing up with fear. For instance, I remember many years ago when I lived in Texas and I was dove hunting with a friend of mine, okay? And you got to understand, you hunt in flight paths, and a lot of times dove will fly over water, so we hunted over a pond. Down there we call them tanks or stock tanks for feeding the livestock or giving them water. Anyways, we're hunting over this tank, and a couple of birds are flying over, and Deadeye Hayes got on one and bam, shot him. One shot and he was down. My friend, though, on the other hand, had 3 in his gun, and boom, boom, and he wounds a bird and it flies into a tree. So I go down to retrieve my bird on the edge of the water, and he goes, and I hear, boom, Jerry, a snake. Now, common sense would make you believe that he shot the snake, right? Boom, Jerry, a snake. Well, when I go over to him, where is it? And he's trying to load empty shotgun shells into his shotgun, and I'm like, what's going on? It's still alive. It's right there. Well, here's the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say, right? And by the way, I took care of the snake too, all right? So anyways, the bird was in that tree, and when he stepped to shoot, he felt something wiggle under his foot, and it was a rattlesnake, okay? A rattlesnake. He had a moment of fear that caused him to explode, right? He jumped off that snake and cleared it so that he was not in harm's way. So fear, in some ways, is something that God's wired in us that can be a good thing, right? He was rescued from being bitten by a rattlesnake. Now, the other response that I talked about is that response of seizing up in fear of freezing. And I believe we see the clearest picture of that with the disciples after Jesus was murdered on the cross, right? Here Jesus is crucified, and they witnessed it. And where did Jesus meet them after his resurrection, the majority of them? In a room. They were locked up in a room. The scriptures tell us they were locked up for fear of the Jews. They were afraid that the very same thing might happen to them. They seized up with fear and locked themselves up, thinking that they might be out of harm's way. And Jesus goes and he encounters them. He enters the room and he says, "Peace be with you." What a thing to say to somebody when they're seized up with fear. You know, in our world, maybe you look at the big picture of what's happening in Christianity and some of the attacks on Christianity and Christians in particular, and maybe that strikes a little fear in your heart. Maybe not for you, but for others. But I mean, if you take just a few weeks ago, right, the Coptic Christians in Egypt that were attacked as a point of terrorism acted out upon Christians in a very non-Christian country. I know I looked up in preparation for this message, what are the most dangerous countries to live in as a Christian? And the list varied a little bit, but every one of them said number one was North Korea. North Korea. As a matter of fact, if you're caught with the Bible in your possession, that's immediate death, okay? And then it went on from there, and you might guess some of the others like Somalia, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. That's why one of the reasons I've got a lot of respect for we've got a Pakistani congregation that worships every Sunday afternoon out in the historic chapel. And I'll never forget one of my conversations with one of the church leaders, and I said, he told me, he said that people drive all the way from Milwaukee to come and worship with them. And I said, really? All the way from Milwaukee? Why would they drive so far? And his response, he says, how many Pakistani Christians do you think there are, right? And it makes perfect sense because they're afraid to be Christians in Pakistan, seized up with fear because of what might happen. What about us? What causes us to seize up and not live out our Christian walk? What kind of fear do we have? You know, I recall in a few chapters after what was read for you today, when Jesus was teaching parables, it says, when the chief priests and Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was speaking about them, and although they were seeking to